Hello, Bulls fans. Welcome to the CHGO Bulls Podcast, presented to you by our friends at DraftKings Sportsbook, America's top-rated sportsbook. Download the app and be sure to use promo code when you sign up, and of course, our promo code being CHGO. I am Mark K from Australia, just clearly on fire this morning.
What time is it there, Mark? Is it early?
It's 8:30 a.m. I'm thrown by this freaking dog in the background that's barking, so apologies. I'm just not on my game at the moment, but I am joined, as always, by the most beautiful beat writer in the universe. Not just the world, the universe. William Gottlieb, how are you, sir?
It gets more extreme every time. I'm doing all right. I'm in the process of rationalizing and coming to terms with where the Bulls are in the world, in the universe, where they stand in the play-in and beyond. And I'm excited to talk it out with you because I feel like I will be a little bit more objective and level-headed about it in the next hour.
You think?
Yeah,
I won't push you over the edge even more. I just got done reading your article from last night or this morning on the website, or CHGO, to follow all of William's musings. But we'll get into that in a little bit more. Obviously, we're going to talk about the fact that there's only 2 more games left in the season. If there's anything left to learn from this season, if there's anything left to glean. I mean, there's 2 games in the regular season, but we know that there's a playing game coming up. The Bulls look like they're locked into 10th, probably going to be playing the Raptors in a 9-10 clash. So that'll be interesting to see. Maybe there's only 3 games left in the season. Who knows? But we'll be talking about that. We'll be referencing the article that you sort of touched on there, getting into that in a little bit more detail, because I think it's a fascinating conversation. And I wanted to close out the show by diving more into some of the CBA changes. That's probably been the most exciting thing of my week, to be honest with you. I don't know if anyone else cares about the CBA stuff, but I certainly do. And it does, or it will have an impact to the Bulls going forward. Interestingly. So we'll see how we get through all these topics, how we hit on that, but that's all obviously the plan. We are also joined by a man who just loves an eggplant parmesan. So law on the draw on the buttons today. There he is.
What an intro. A man who just loves an eggplant parmesan.
Yes, but where from? Las Carolla, and
I forgot the name of the joint, but
who's the vegetarian that didn't order what I told him to order? It would be that guy up there.
My ravioli was beautiful, so
I'm sure it was delicious.
But
that chicken parm. I need my athletic greens this morning.
There you go. All right, thanks, guys.
We'll save that read for a little bit later, because we've got our friends, or a note from our friends at Athletic Greens coming up a little bit later. But William, let's dive into it. Let's start with the last 2 games anyway. We'll work our way from there. And I definitely want to get on that article you wrote yesterday, because it's a good one. But let's start. Bulls are locked into 10th, as I said. There's 2 games left. Very high-level question, I guess. But is there anything left to learn from this very maddening, frustrating, sometimes okay, sometimes fun season, but more often not, very painful and very stressful season? Is there anything left to learn in these final couple games, and maybe even the playing game?
I think resolve is probably the one thing that I can say that I'm curious about. Like, we've seen it at times where, like the last 2 games, for example, they just rolled over and the game was over as soon as the tip. There have also been times where, the Grizzlies game, where you're down 21 and then or maybe 23, and then you win by 21 because of how well you play defense and how you stick to the game plan and how you just like chip away and continue to like believe in the process behind what you're doing. And this last week or so has reminded me a lot more of the first half Bulls than the post All-Star Bulls. And so I'm curious to see, because I think we can all agree that they've played a lot better since the All-Star break. But the question for me is, like, can they continue to recover and withstand these sort of runs? And can they be resilient? And can they bounce back from these 2 really bad losses that they've just had and actually get through the play-in tournament and maybe get back to the playoffs? So I think that's the one thing. As far as bigger picture, we've seen the stat, going around Twitter as far as Vooch, Zach LaVine, and DeMar playing the most minutes of any 3-man combination in the league and being minus 16, I think it is, on the season. Like, we kind of know what the team is. We know that there needs to be some changes this summer, but I think, can they put it together to just not get not roll over in the playoffs the way that they have at times throughout the course of this year and really throughout the course of this core playing together.
Yeah, and look, that's the oddity of the last few games because let's go back 3 games ago against the Grizzlies. The Bulls played a really bad first half, but then to your point, like they showed that resolve and had that amazing turnaround in that second half to the point where maybe they've played their best half of basketball in I don't even know how long, like years, I would imagine. So like they in that specific game, which was only a couple games ago, like they showed exactly what you're talking about, and that more generally has been the ethos of the team since Pat Bev has arrived. And if you want to ascribe that the Pat Bev effect to anything, like that's what I would probably point to first. The fact that they have been more resilient, they've been a little bit more tougher, they've been more engaged, more locked in, and even when they get down, they were more inclined to what's the name, like sustain, I suppose. But over the last 2 games, particularly the game against the Hawks, who were missing 2 starters, no Trey. After that game, what was Zach's quote? That the Hawks wanted it more. Like, how can that be the case after what you've sort of shown us in the previous 20 games, where you have shown that you can compete and get back in games and get yourself back into this position where you are getting into the plane, and we were all starting to buy back in, maybe a little too much, but yeah, how do you just go from what they had become to seemingly stepping back to what they had been previously? That's the confusing part. And then, as we saw yesterday against the Bucks, again down 2 starters, it could have easily been a W if you just got some average performances from DeRozan and Levine, but they just couldn't do it. So they're in this maddening situation again where they're sort of floating through, being that new team that we liked seeing, that really enjoyable team that we like seeing, to seeing what we're seeing now, which is, like, to your point, like the team that we saw in the first 50, 60 games of the season. And that's not how we want to be entering in the playing situation, which is like, okay, now you're locked into 10th. You got the Mavericks coming up tomorrow on Friday night. You close the season against the Detroit Pistons. Like, there's nothing really left to, I don't know, to get from the final 2 games from my point of view. But I don't know. I guess the only path that I can paint from this, I guess, is maybe the young guys get some run here going into these final 2 games, because it seems like DeMar and Zach are going to be sitting against the Mavericks on Friday night. Caruso is likely to do so as well. The Mavericks are still within the play-in hunt on the West, so they will be playing Luka. They will be playing Kyrie. So maybe like Kobe starts, maybe Pat starts. Maybe these guys get a run against actual good, credible starters against an opposition team who's trying to win games. Maybe that is something good.
Well, just before we move on to the Mavs and the rest of the season, something you said, I think, was interesting, which is like, what have we really figured out about this second half team in comparison to the first half? And, the difference between sort of rolling over and at least having some resilience that they've shown over the second half. And I think when you said that, it just kind of made me think that they're sort of the same version of that team, but just with a little bit more talent. When you have a guy like Patrick Beverley who can push Io into a bench role, when you start your best player at power forward, which is Alex Caruso, and push Patrick Williams to a bench role, the talent gets upgraded. The players fit into their spots a little bit more. But at the end of the day, they are still who they are. And who they are is like a team that's a little bit better, but it still has that DNA from the first half. And I think that's where that they wanted it more than us quote from Zach after the Hawks game comes into play, where it's like, yeah, things have changed, but like, have they really changed? Because we're still seeing the same Bulls. Yes, they've had a better stretch here, but they had a 8-3 stretch at one point after the Timberwolves lost, where they gave up 150. They've also had 7-game losing streaks. Like this team just is what it is at this point. I think the record is more reflective of who they are now than it was when they were 7 games below 500, but they're still a sub 500 team. And this is the kind of thing that happens when you're the 10th best team in your conference and you're below 500. Even if the talent is there, like that doesn't always matter, because the record is, the record says who you are. And these games that they've really needed to win against teams like the Raptors right after the All-Star break, like this one against the Hawks, like those were must-win games and they couldn't do it. I think that is, so more than like, what can we learn from these upcoming games? I think, yes, they've had a better stretch here, but what I've taken away from these past few weeks is that they're sort of a better version of the same team with the same flaws.
I mean, all fair, but maybe I just bought too much into the Pat Bev effect. I was too Pat
Yeah,
Bev
you got a
filled, so
Pat Bev jersey hanging behind you.
I don't know if that's true, but let's pretend.
You were Pat Bev pilled.
Pat Bev pilled. But unfortunately, maybe I just overdosed on the Pat Bev effect there. What the hell is that?
What is going on your screen? Is that a real dog?
That scared the shit out of me for a second.
Sorry, I just thought that you were worried about a dog. I just figured I'd put him on screen for you.
He's got that dog in him.
Is that a dingo? What the hell is that? Bloody hell, mate! Don't do that. That scared the shit out of me. Anyways.
That's a dingo.
Look at that production extraordinaire, Lawrence. Just
the production value just goes through the roof when Joey's not with us. I gotta say,
people, come on now, look at all these beautiful things Joey's made for you. He's made Goon of the Night. He's made Meathead Hours. I mean, there's all kinds of random things. Scoop it, dump it, shake it. Come on, look at all these fun things. Just random things that are in our show. It's all good here. Joey's the best.
That's all good.
If people are listening via audio. And are confused, come back until about the 11-minute mark of this episode because that was strange.
Yeah.
Strange.
Do you want the dingo back or not back? Because I could
maybe later. Maybe bring the dingo back later.
Okay.
Surprise him.
Dingo-less.
Surprise him with it.
What the hell were we talking about? Pre-dingo. We were talking about.
You were replying to my stance that the Bulls were just sort of a more talented, more well-constructed version of the same old Bulls.
Yeah, look, and look, maybe I'm prone to doing this, and because we had 60 games of just absolute trash or 50 games of absolute trash, and the first sight of something that looked like reasonable basketball, maybe I just fell victim to that because I was just lamenting so much of those first 50 games that any side of good basketball I was just immediately in. But maybe the fact that sort of coincided with me being in Chicago and that whole thing, and just being alight with the whole concept of what the Bulls were being at that stage. Maybe I felt too hard, but maybe that's on me. Maybe that's on some of the fan base as well in terms of just falling too hard into that Pat Bev effect. But I just thought they were past this level of nonsense. Like we saw it. Like I said, they played a really good game against the Grizzlies, whereby they got down, they showed that resolve, and they got back into it. Now, that was unsustainable in the sense of how they were shooting and those sorts of things, but it's less the result, but also the process. Whereas that process just completely disappeared on what was it, Tuesday night against Atlanta. Like that was arguably the biggest game of the season, and in the biggest game of the season, they reverted back to the same old nonsense. Like I did think or thought that sort of stuff was gone. And look, clearly I was wrong, but I just assumed that level of nonsense was gone, but for whatever reason it's not, William. So we are where we are.
Yeah, and I didn't want to believe it either, but like I think the evidence at this point is kind of overwhelming. Like you've had some of these games where you have had really good wins, like the Brooklyn win coming right out of the break. They won by like 44. That's a great win. And then you beat Washington. At the time, that was a really important game because the Wizards were, I believe the Wizards were 10 and the Bulls were 11 or 11 and 12 or something like that. And then you go into another one of these games against Toronto, in Toronto, which is a difficult place to play, and you lose. It was a tough game, but like that's a game you kind of have to have. And then this win against Detroit, they were up 20 all game, and then they blew the lead, and they ended up winning after Jaden Ivey called the timeout when they didn't have any. They lost to the Pacers again. Like, yes, they beat the Nuggets, who at the time were kind of on a skid. The next game, they were down against the Rockets for the majority and then came back and won. But like, we still have seen a lot of this fluctuation. They almost lost to the Timberwolves when Anthony Edwards wasn't there. They have played well against Miami and Philly, but then they also lost against the 76ers the next game. They played great against the Lakers when LeBron was kind of coming back from this injury, didn't really look like himself. Then they get smoked by the Clippers and the Lakers again. So then you have the Memphis game where it looks like the same thing's happening, but then the second half, the flip switches. Like, I just don't think that this team is like, I mean, we've kind of gone through the narrative over and over. Like, this is the one thing that Billy talks about nonstop, which is like the consistency aspect of it. And that's absolutely true, that they're not consistent. You don't know, like, I think a lot of times these numbers over the course of a season will average out to be what they are, right? Like the Bulls last year were a couple games above 500. This year, they're going to be a couple games below 500. On average, that's where you end up. but the peaks and valleys are so extreme that it's really hard to like pinpoint how good this team actually is. And that's where I'm at right now with them, is like, how good is this team? You lose to the two teams that you could potentially face in this play-in tournament. We can kind of get into that here, but like what gives you hope other than just like the fact that they have at points played a lot better, that they could beat those teams given the way that they've played against them post All-Star break when they have been playing their best ball?
Well, look, I thought it was going to be a tale of two seasons, just as it was last season. Like, obviously, like I said, the first 50 games of this season, I was sort of casting that away, assuming that that was one set of Chicago Bulls or one iteration of the Bulls. And I figured that based on what the metrics were telling us of this team, yeah, there were some bad losses, as you noted in there, during the start of this Pat Bev era, if we want to call it that. But there were some tremendous wins. The team more generally was functioning at an extremely elite level on defense, which maybe that was unsustainable, and maybe they're not as good as the first ranked defense in the NBA through that stretch. But obviously they've come down since. But I just thought we could just cut up this season, chalk it up in two different ways. And yes, averages will be averages and all that sort of stuff. I completely agree, but I didn't expect them to revert back to who they were pre-Pat Bev, post-Pat Bev. And I'm not saying that it's all Pat Bev. That's the line of demarcation just for me, because I just assumed things were changing. And to be fair, I assumed all that stuff because the numbers were changing. Their play had changed. There were some bad, annoying losses in there. But
like, I think the one pushback I have there too is like, even at the end of last year, first of all, at the beginning of last season, we could all agree that like the numbers and the record wasn't necessarily indicative of how good they were. The second half, I think it was the opposite. They went, I think, 8-15 to finish out the year. They weren't as bad as we kind of thought they were, but they also had those moments. Like the one that comes to mind is DeMar scoring 50 against the Clippers at home and having one more of those clutch, heroic DeMar games. Like those things can still happen during a stretch where you aren't playing as good. I think the same is true where you can have really good games over a stretch where you're not playing as good, or have bad stretches when you are playing well.
All fair, but Demond, our guy Demond in the comments, he notes people bought into the Pat Bev effect, and he's a few laughing emojis there. Well, Demond, when you're someone like me who has an all or nothing personality and you're prone to binging, let's say, I was all in on Pat Bev. I wanted to believe in the Pat Bev effect, and maybe the good is still to come around. Maybe the Pat Bev effect is just lulling us into a state of insecurity here. We're going to finish these last two games on a bit of a lull. Then the plane hits, and then that's where Pat Bev.
Come on, playing Pat. He rises to
exactly.
The level.
We're going to get that dub against the Raptors. We're going to go into the Hawks building or the Heat building, whoever's it's going to be. We're going to take them down, and then we're going to get back to the playoffs just to get absolutely slaughtered by the Milwaukee Bucks yet again. But I believe that the Pat Bev effect is still real, folks. So we've got two more games to believe in the Pat Bev effect, but maybe I'm just being a complete dope. So that's highly, highly probable. But yeah, I guess the ultimate takeaway here, William, is there's nothing really left to learn from the final two games this season. The team is what it is. It is maddening. It is frustrating. They can be great. They can be terrible, as we've sort of witnessed over the last three games. You get it all, basically, with this basketball team, which is the frustration. We'll come back and we'll talk a little bit more about that, as well as your article, as I mentioned before, that the fact that is the play-in tournament actually a good thing, a good concept? I know you have some thoughts on that. I certainly do too. We'll dive into that a little bit more in a little bit more detail. But first, William, can I tell you about my favorite beer company, Goose Island?
Please do. Our favorite spot to go have a beer.
Oh, there's that goose. Hopefully people think
better than the dingo.
All the animals. It's Noah's Ark here on CHGO Bulls. There's our dingo, and here is our friends at Goose Island Beer. This place, I wish Goose used to come out to Australia. They used to have beer. Used to export their beer out to Australia. I'm not sure if they still do, but Goose Island, our friends over there, if you're having plans of doing, can you please do so? Because I just want to get my hands on some of that sweet, sweet Matilda again. That Belgian ale was beautiful. If not the Matilda, then I'm more than happy to have a 312, or I'll try anything at this stage. I'm just so deprived of my Goose Island beer at this stage that I will have anything these guys will send me, whether it's the Black Hawks Pale Ale, the Bull City 312, that limited release edition. I'm not much of a dark beer drinker, William, but if people want to send me a stout from Goose Island, whether it's for the people from Goose Island or whether it's you, William, if you just want to, send me a couple of beers, put it in the post and mail it down to me, it'll probably take about 3 weeks to get here and it'll be blazing hot once it does. But I'll put it in the fridge and it'll be beautiful to drink down after this plane run that the Bulls are going to be going on obviously. But for those that aren't aware, enough ranting here from me, but I love Goose Island beer. I love it because obviously the beer is great, but the fact that you can go to one of their tap rooms, one of their 2 locations, whether that's 1800 West Fulton or if you want to go to 1800 North Clybourne, that's the one we went to when I first met William and Matt in person. If you want to have good beers, being good company, then rep our guys at Goose Island, our friends there. So I can't endorse these people enough. They're the one thing that I do miss or should have done, William, is I really wanted to get a Goose Island hat whilst we were there. Rep the merch of our friends at Goose Island, but I didn't do that. There you go. Look at that beautiful thing. So that was my one regret from Chicago. So again, William, if you wanna send me some beers, if you want to send me some Goose Island merch, that would be great. But next time in Chicago, I want to have an event at Goose Island as well. So if you want to do all that, if you want to get around your friends, if you want to have some brews, like I said, head to their 2 locations. Support CHGO by supporting our fabulous friends at Goose Island Beer Company. You will not regret it, friends. You will certainly not regret it. Another thing you won't regret is after you've downed your beer, you want to down that Athletic Greens, which William does on a daily basis.
Yeah, if you're feeling a little hungover after you're just slamming Matildas, slamming your 3-1-2s, you wake up in the morning and you take your Athletic Greens. I have been taking Athletic Greens for over a year now, which is kind of crazy to say. And I started taking it because I wanted better gut health. I wanted more energy. I wanted to protect my immune system. We got COVID is making a little spike here. Like, try to protect yourself against that. And I've been learning a little bit more about like supplements and, trying to be healthy and protect myself against sickness and aging and things like that. And what's great about Athletic Greens is that you're taking all the supplements that you need, but without a million different pills and vitamins. It's all one scoop of 75 high quality vitamins and minerals, whole food source superfoods, probiotics, and Big Dave's favorite, the adaptogens. And they are there to help you start your day right. It is a special blend of ingredients that supports, like I said, your gut health, your nervous system, your immune system, energy, recovery, focus, and aging. Everything that you want to do. It is lifestyle friendly, whether you eat keto, paleo, vegan, dairy-free, or gluten-free. It's Mark K approved. It contains less than a gram of sugar. There's no GMOs, chemicals, artificial flavorings, or anything like that. And it still tastes great. Helps better support sleep quality and recovery, mental clarity, alertness, and just helps you be more focused and alert and energetic throughout the day. And the best part is it all costs less than $3 a day. That's investing in your health, and it's cheaper than your cold brew habit. So right now, it is time to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with convenient daily nutrition. It's 1 scoop in water every day. That's it. No need for a million different pills and supplements to look out for your health. And to make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/CHGO Bulls. That's athleticgreens.com/CHGO Bulls to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance.
I think all the micronutrients and all the goodness within the product, within the Athletic Greens product, rather, I think that's what's responsible for your quaffness, just generally speaking, William. I think you've been more quaffed since joining CHGO, and there's no coincidence there. I think since you've been downing that Athletic Greens, it's just added some room and some volume to
some volume, yeah,
to that hair. So, friends, if you want to improve your hair as well, I mean, maybe Athletic Greens don't necessarily agree with my statement here, and maybe this is a statement just on my behalf, but I just do think there is a correlation here between the voluminous nature of your hair since downing the Athletic Greens. But How do I segue out of that into the fact that the play-in is a tax on the middle class and isn't actually a good concept? How do I do that, William? I think I just did.
I think you just did it, Eric. Sometimes you just have to rip the Band-Aid off. I think you just did it.
There we go. Well, it feels like sometimes the play-in is a bit of a Band-Aid solution, particularly for this team at the moment. It feels like we're winning, but actually we're kind of not. So you had an interesting story up, like I said, up the website, allchgo.com, diving into your thoughts more generally about the play-in situation, whether this is a good thing, whether it's just, well, I'll let you speak to it, I guess. I'll let you dive into exactly what your feelings are on it. But it's an interesting takeaway. People, if you haven't read it, obviously go to the website after this podcast, read it in more detail. But maybe you can explain to those who haven't read it as to what you were trying to, I guess, get across, or what your feeling is on the play-in, particularly for the middle class of the NBA, which unfortunately the Bulls seemingly always find themselves in.
Yeah, and that's exactly why I was interested in this. I think I was listening to a Zach Lowe podcast the other day, and he basically said, like, nobody thinks that the play-in is a bad idea. And I, for the most part, think it's exciting, right? Like the games have been really exciting. You remember back to the first one, I think it was like Wolves versus Nuggets during the Tom Thibodeau, Jimmy Butler era. And Cat got his first, trip to the playoffs. And that was like a really exciting game. And I think that sort of single elimination factor that makes March Madness so great, bringing that to the NBA, has added a ton of excitement. But at the end of the day, like, to what end? I think basically my thought here is that, like, this is very short-sighted, short-term thinking, immediate gratification kind of thinking that keeps teams in the middle on this sort of hamster wheel between like the 8th and 12th best teams in the conference. And is that really like an accomplishment? Is that really where you want to be? I think right now it's a little tricky to just say 1-for-1 with the Bulls, because they weren't guaranteed the rights of their own draft pick this year. But like, the Bulls have been in this scenario, like you said, for what seems like forever. Basically, since Derrick Rose got hurt, they've clearly not been good enough to win, but they've clearly also not been willing or able to do the full-on tank. And I know you could say like the rebuild lasted 3 or 4 years, and they only ever ended up with the 7th pick. Yep. But that's not entirely true, because they didn't necessarily follow through with the tank in a way that would have positioned them as a team that could have gotten that first pick. They won extra games. They went on a little run when Nikola Mirotic came back from getting his face bruised and punched in by Bobby Portis, before they started really tanking again. Like, in order to make that work, you have to execute perfectly. And I get why that's a rough thing. It's a scary thing. But to me, like, the argument to not do that is that, or the argument against that is that it's loser mentality, right? We can't justify to our fans, we can't justify to ourselves, and we can't, frankly, let it happen that we're just losing games on purpose. Like, we're too competitive. We can't operate that way as an organization. But to me, like, not doing that is loser mentality, because you just get stuck in the middle like the Bulls are now, and it gives you no options to get out, right? Like, at least the teams at the bottom have a chance. Like, the Bulls had a chance to get themselves back into, a legitimate team when they accumulated all the assets they did. They had all their draft picks. They had Wendell Carter and Kobe White and Larry Markkinen, and then they had the 4th pick that turned into Patrick Williams. Like, you're in a position where you can make some moves. They did, and it didn't work out, but now they're stuck in the middle again. And it just makes me feel like this idea, this consolation prize of making the playoffs through the play-in, is exactly that. It's a consolation prize. And I don't think that the Bulls or any other team should really be aspiring towards it. And when that is your goal, that's how you stay in the middle. And it seems like that's just kind of where the Bulls are headed. So last night's loss, obviously the one against the Hawks, I think that was, again, sort of this distraction from the reality, which is that the Bulls are either going to be the 8th, 9th, or 10th best team in the Eastern Conference. And to me, like, there's this whole thing from the fan base, this is the Chicago Bulls. This is like a world-class organization, a world-class market, one of the top 3 media markets in the league. They had Michael Jordan. They've got this rich history, but it's like, it's not. They are a middle-class team. That's who they are. That's who they've been. They have been on pace for 37 wins every single season since Michael Jordan retired. And that's pretty much where they're going to end up this year. And that's why it happens, because you strive to be in the middle, you end up in the middle.
I don't disagree with some of the things that you said, or put another way, I agree with some things that you did say, but I don't think the plane or the invention of the plane isn't the reason that the Bulls are finding themselves in the middle as often as they are. Like, that's not why they're there. I don't think they're striving to be a mid team just because of the plane itself. I think this speaks to everything that's been wrong with this team for the last 25 years. Which is things like ownership, which is things like management, the nonsense that we all know the backstories of all that. So, playing or not, I think the Bulls would just be mid based on how they operate and the level of which they see themselves, or the level at which they want to operate. Like all those things that you said, the fact that they are a global franchise or should be a global franchise, that they are such a huge market, like those things are true. But the reason why they're so mid isn't because there's the plane to chase in that instance. The reason why they're so mid is because Jerry Reinsdorf is a mid owner, and that's me being extremely generous. He's not even mid. AK has done a very, very bad job in building this team. Like, okay, the result of this team is that they're in the 10th seed. They're playing it in. They're playing it out, trying to, get back into the plane. But the play-in didn't stop them from not doing anything at the deadline. The play-in didn't stop them from not using their mid-level exception. The play-in didn't stop them from making the Vooch trade or not doing this or that. Like, the play-in is a thing that exists, a concept that exists that I think has worked for the NBA that I actually like. But the Bulls being so mid, I don't think is the play-in's fault. I think it's just the result of them just making mistake after mistake after mistake. And I think the play-in could be a good thing, assuming you get your management and your ownership right, which clearly this team just hasn't done. And I think there will be examples throughout this season and seasons going forward where teams will use the play-in as a situation to sort of bolster who they are as an organization. The Bulls haven't done that, but I don't think that's a referendum on the play-in itself. I just think that's more speaks to the fact that the Bulls are so comfortable being this middle of the road team. And again, that's us being generous. I think they're actually been worse than that.
It gives, though, like, I think it incentivizes you to be a middle of the road team rather than to try to bottom out and do what the Pacers did, or even the Blazers. Like, they were going for it, and then they took a look in the mirror and said, this is who we are. We have to put ourselves in the best position to get another franchise player. But I think when you have something like the play-in, it incentivizes you to keep going for it, even if you top out at 10. And that's exactly what happened to the Bulls. So I think it's kind of like chicken or the egg. And I think both are true. But when you provide some sort of achievement in the middle, I think a lot of teams will go for that. Now, would it be different if a team like the Oklahoma City Thunder or the Utah Jazz, who weren't expected to be anything and just have a bunch of young players, and all of a sudden they put it together and make the play-in, like the Pelicans last year, for example? That's a great play-in story. But when you're built around multiple 33-year-olds, and this is what you end up with, like, I think it's much worse when you are in the Bulls position. So I agreed that it's not like necessarily the problem, but I do think for a certain number of teams, the play-in incentivizes mediocrity. And I don't think the NBA should be supporting that. Instead, what I think they should do is flatten the lottery odds even more. If they want to curb tanking, which I think they should probably do, make it just as easy to get the first overall pick if you make the play-in than if you are the worst team in the league. And that'll give teams a reason to still be competitive without necessarily sitting their guys or pulling the plug on Damian Lillard, because their teams will still have a chance even if they do try to compete. Like, I think that's a more respectable way to go about it, by at least continuing to try, because the reward could still be there. You're rewarded for trying even if you fail. Now, that could penalize teams like, the unlucky, like the Rockets, for example, have just not really had any talent. If they continue to get unlucky in the draft, then it's going to be a long time before they can rebuild. But I think you're looking at the same thing with these middle-class teams, which is that, like, if they're unwilling to go up or down, or they can't go up, but they're unwilling to go down, then they stay where they are too. And is that really good for the league? Is that really good for the fan base? I don't think so.
Again, I agree with a lot of what you're saying, but ultimately, is it on the NBA to force the situation where is it on the NBA to force the Bulls out of the middle? Like, is it their responsibility, or is it the responsibility of the team? Like, beyond the Bulls, like, is it the NBA's responsibility to ensure that the Wizards don't take pride in finishing 11th every season or 9th or whatever it might be? Like, is that on
It
the
should be.
NBA?
Like, that's
Or
bad for a huge fan base. Like,
it
I
is,
think
but
that's a bad thing for the NBA to have these teams that just are spinning on the treadmill of mediocrity.
well, I don't disagree, but I guess what I'm saying is, like, that to me is not the NBA's fault. That is the person who's leading or managing those respective teams. Like, the NBA isn't forcing the Wizards or Ted Leonsis into being this complete mid organization. Like, the NBA is not forcing Jerry Reinsdorf into being what they are. Like, the NBA did not force AK to do jack shit at the deadline. Like, these things. I think
But it allows them to be comfortable with those decisions because they can still say, well, we made the play-in. We made the postseason. We gave ourselves a chance to be the 8th seed. Like, I think by creating that sort of consolation prize, participation trophy, you are encouraging these lazier teams, these teams that are potentially, unwilling to spend or whatever it is. You're giving them an out. You're giving them a reason to not do what I think you kind of need to do. And if, again, I like, the best way to build a team is obviously through the draft, and the new CBA rules support that just as well. Like, that's where that's the only place where you can really, attempt to get a franchise changing talent. And so if you make those odds a little bit flatter, you're not you're de-incentivizing tanking by providing more competitive landscape without having the penalty of like trying and failing.
Yeah, I get it. I'm certainly not against flattening the odds. I think that is a good idea. I think it would be extremely tough to negotiate and put into the league, because I think small market teams and those teams truly at the bottom who are, for example, if the Lakers miss if the Lakers are in the play and they miss the playoffs and they were, they finished 14th, they're at the end of the lottery, but they were to jump up and grab the number 1 pick, small market teams will be absolutely banging on the door of Adam Silver's office and demanding something to go back to how things were in terms of the lottery odds in that sense. But I guess I don't agree in the sense that it is a consolidation prize. Like, as an example, let's use the Bulls as an example. Obviously, this is a Bulls podcast. Let's talk about the Bulls. If the Bulls finish 10th, like they are now, if they go into the play-in situation and they lose their first game, effectively lose out, they finish 10th, 11th, 12th, or whatever it might be in the standings. They don't keep their pick because we obviously know it's top 4 protected. Let's assume it stays at like 11 or 12. They hand that pick over to the Magic. That's not a consolidation prize at all for this team. Like, that's, if anything, that just puts more onus on all the poor decisions that this franchise has made. So in some examples, it would be a consolidation prize. Like for example, if OKC finish 10th and they get in a playing game, or like the Grizzlies have in years past, or Pat Bev when he took the Minnesota Timberwolves, just as like he's going to do the Bulls here, take them to the playoffs. Like, in those situations, yeah, it's a consolidation prize. But for a team like the Bulls, who are going backwards and all they can do is finish 10th in a season where AK said at the start of this season, we need to do better than what we did last season, which was finish 6th, get to the first round and take a game off the Bucks. If you can't do that and you fall into 10th in the plane, and I would even argue like that's even more of a microscope put on this team, that the fact that if they finish 10th, they lose in the plane, they're guaranteed to have a losing season because they've got 42 losses at this point. I don't think there's going to be any consolation prizes given to this team at all if they do finish this season the way we think it's trending at the moment. So that's kind of where I guess I disagree with you, and I don't think the plane is an incentive for that. I think the heat's going to be amplified even more, to be honest with you.
Well, I think the Bulls, if there wasn't the incentive of being able to make the playoffs through the play-in, they might have gone towards the bottom when they were 7 games below 500. I think the idea is that you're giving them a chance at the postseason, and that, whether they win or lose in this play-in game almost doesn't matter. Like, they can say we made the postseason, or they can say we made the playoffs through the play-in. So we obviously had success there. And again, this isn't necessarily even about the Bulls' success this year or not. Like I said this last night on our show, I think it's true that like you can acknowledge the fact that the Bulls have played a lot better while also standing firm in the stance that the Bulls need to make some changes. Like, those two things are not mutually exclusive. And I think I think both things are true. Like both things are probably going to happen. But if the Bulls are in a position where they realize what their future is and they go towards the bottom to try to protect against that, like I think that's a better alternative than losing in a play-in tournament or getting swept by the Bucks in the first round. That's just me. But I think the incentive of even having that option there is what encouraged the Bulls to continue on the path that they have chosen.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. I certainly understand your perspective, but I just keep coming back to the fact that, all right, if you want to, whether the play-in's there or not, like if you still wanted to chase the playoffs, and look, that could have been a case because it's not like the 8th seed, the Bulls were that far behind the 8th seed anyway, so there was still a theoretical chance that they could get 8 even without the play-in. That I'm just always going to revert back to this not being an NBA issue. It's just being a team construct issue, a team philosophy issue. And if AK wants to somehow say that, in his postseason wrap up that they were trying to make the playoffs, that the play-in incentivized them, then that's just the platform for us, for you and I and whoever else that has a voice to say, well, why the hell did you do nothing at the deadline? Why'd you do this? Why'd you do that? He just opens himself up for I guess criticism. Like that criticism is going to come regardless. But the fact that I think that actually that criticism is going to be a lot louder if they do finish 10th and miss the play-in in this situation. Whereas if they obviously folded it up at the deadline and went for a rebuild or a retool at that point, which was our preferred option, you and I don't think the heat would be as amplified. Whereas now I think it's coming for them. So in some ways, William, I think it might serve in a good way. But I certainly get your point. I just disagree. A rare disagreement between us. That's an interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's both, but I've said.
You said your piece.
I've said my piece,
both in podcast form and obviously on the website. So obviously you've heard William here. If you haven't read his article, obviously jump on to allchgo.com to do so. We'll continue the show. I want to close out the show talking about nerdy CBA stuff. I like that stuff, and a lot of the changes that have been made will pertain and impact the Bulls over the coming off seasons. But before we get into that, let's talk about Shady Rays. So it's getting warmer in Chicago. Summer is approaching, and I'm sure all you Chicagoans are just loving the fact that it's still probably cold. I'm assuming it's cold. There's the dingo. He looks a little bit cold at the moment, but when the summer comes through, that dingo is going to want to throw on some shade. So Lawrence, can you do some production work and put some Shady Rays glasses on that dingo? Because that dingo is going to need the sun out of his eyes. And what better way to remove that sun, remove that glare than to partner with our friends at Shady Rays, who've got you covered for the warm weather. So if you're interested in premium polarized shades at an affordable price, you have to head to Shady Rays, friends. Shady Rays is an independent sunglasses company that offers a world-class product that's just as good as your any expensive sunglasses. I've never understood why people pay for expensive sunglasses. Like, they're so prone to breaking. They're so prone to being lost. Why would you pay like several hundreds of dollars, sometimes just absolutely ridiculous prices for sunglasses when people like Shady Rays exist, we can get just a fantastic product at a great price. I don't understand it. Like this is the company that I would be using if I were to wear sunglasses in the summer. Do you wear sunglasses, William? You obviously wear glasses, but are you a sunglasses man?
I got my Shady Rays right behind me.
There you go. There you go, people.
Shady Rays.
And look, and as I noted there before, like the reason I would never pay for an expensive pair of glasses is because you could break them, but maybe not more importantly, but you're just prone to losing these things. And this is another great thing with Shady Rays. Like, every pair of sunglasses that you buy, it's backed by their lost and broken replacements. So if you lose or break a pair, even on day one, literally if you walk out of the store and you break those sunglasses because you're an absolute dope who can't put them on your head and somehow they fall and you step on them and you break them, our friends at Shady Rays will hook you up with a brand new pair, no questions asked. That's why we really love Shady Rays. So if you are obviously a listener of CHGO, we appreciate you supporting our partners, all our friends that we partner with. And obviously Shady Rays is a big one that we like to endorse. So if you want to get the best deal of the season, particularly as we're heading into the warmer months, go to shadyrays.com and use promo code CHGO. And by doing so, you will receive 50% off the 2+ pairs that you buy. So if you want to try this out, and why the hell would you not? Because there's been over 250,000 people have given Shady Rays a 5-star review online. So, I mean, I'm endorsing it. William's clearly endorsing it. He's got a pair, but over 250,000 people are saying this is a 5-star product. And with that particular offer on deck, use promo code CHGO, friends, and get yourself a nice pair of sunnies as we head into the warmer months. Why would you not?
Mark?
Yeah.
Let's talk about ComEd.
Let's do it.
The ComEd Energy Efficiency Program is committed to helping families and businesses in the communities they serve, helping manage energy usage and lower energy bills now and into the future.
That is so good. And the fact that another thing that I love, William, like the ComEd offers a wide variety of incentives on lighting and other efficiency upgrades to commercial, to industrial, to public sector customers of all sizes across the territory. So if you're interested in that, ComEd offers free facility assessments that can give and help you find energy saving opportunities, like anything that's related to your HVAC systems, to your commercial kitchen equipment, or any industrial process.
Hey, Mark, how does it work?
Well, let me tell you how it works, William. An authorized engineer will work with you to develop a detailed assessment plan specific to your goals and needs. These can be done in person or they can be happening virtually, and they last approximately for 2 hours. So within 3 to 4 weeks, your customers will receive a detailed report that basically lists out all your energy efficiency opportunities or projects that you can start working on immediately. So each recommendation will come with a list of energy saving options, the cost savings that it can be attributed to that, the project cost of the project itself, the potential incentives, and any simple payback systems that are included with that project. So if you own a business, friends, why would you not be using ComEd? I don't know about what the situation is in Chicago, but pricing for like electricity here in Australia is just ridiculous. I would love to be able to use ComEd. So if you wanted to get started saving money and energy today, please do so, friends. So for energy saving tips, lighting incentives, or schedule your free facility assessment, go to comed.com/poweringbiz.
That's comed.com/poweringbiz.
That is. So do it. comed.com/poweringbiz. Schedule it today, friends. What a great read. Oh, there's the dingo with the Shady Rays.
The Shady Rays.
Look at that fella. He's looking smart. Like
Now you got to get a ComEd Energy Efficiency Program document in his paw.
Put another one there for Lawrence to do. But look at this
scoop
that
of
dingo
athletic
just
greens.
looks...
I just can't believe I'm doing this right now.
Neither can I, to be honest with you, but it's great.
We didn't need the boring lottery graphics I made. Instead, I'm just putting the dingo with sunglasses on. I mean, what are we doing? This is good stuff.
No, I appreciate it. And look, if that dingo is capable enough to put on a pair of Shady Rays, then surely everyone tuning in can do so. And like I said, great offer using the promo code CHGO. And if that dingo were to lose his pair of Shady Rays, he'd get them back. And friends, if you're loving these ad reads, if you're loving the production value of this of CHGO, then give us a like. Why don't you? Come on, do it on your way out. If you're watching, give us a like. If you're listening, 5-star reviews on Apple, Spotify, all of them. Do it for the dingo. But let's close out the show.
For the dingo.
Do it for the dingo. Put that on a t-shirt. But let's close out the show talking about the CBA and the changes that the NBA and the Players Association came to an agreement basically a week ago. There's going to be a whole bunch of changes, and which is good. They've obviously come to an agreement on a new CBA, which is good for a number of different reasons, for all the reasons we're going to touch on. But the main important thing is there's no work stoppages, so we're not going to lose any basketball in that sense. So that's cool from just that pure perspective. But there's a lot of changes that are happening in the CBA. Dave and Matt hit on a few the other day, but there's a lot more to go through. And to be fair, we're going to be learning a lot more over the coming weeks and months as well. Whilst we've got dribs and drabs here, whilst we've learned a few little things, there's still a lot we don't necessarily know in terms of how it's actually going to be applied, when it's going to be applied, those sorts of things. So there's still a lot to learn. So I wanted to preface that. And I say that because when the news was coming out, there was certain things that really concerned me, like the ability of the players to invest in teams or become owners of teams, to invest in gambling companies. And like when that news initially dropped, I was like, what the hell? This sounds extremely problematic, and there's certainly going to be a conflict of interest. But then as we learned more, that they're not necessarily it's not like, Zach's going to go up to Jerry and say, give me 5% of the team or something like that. The structure of how it's actually going to work is a little bit different. So I guess the point here is we're going to learn more in time. So whilst our view on it is based on what we know today, things can change tomorrow. But William, I wanted to talk about the changes that I think are most relevant to the Bulls themselves. There's a few to get through, so let's try to whip through them as quick as possible. But the one that I think is most interesting, and I'm assuming will come in first, is the fact that there's going to be an increase in revenue streams. The players will now have access to apply BRI, basketball-related income, to things like licensing revenue and those sorts of things. So that will likely increase the salary cap. And we already know, based on the TV deal, that the salary cap's increasing. There will be a new TV deal coming as well in the next couple of years, which is going to increase the salary cap even more. So why this is interesting to me is people like to talk about Zach LaVine's contract and how bad it is and these sorts of things. Well, friends, the salary cap is going up. Zach LaVine's contract is staying stagnant. His deal is going to be looking very good very soon. But more generally, it just gives the team more cap space or potentially a higher salary cap to, I guess, reinvent or change their roster. So that's an interesting and appealing aspect to the changes that have been floated.
Yeah, and the other thing about that is that there's reports that it'll be smoothing. So basically, you're going to avoid this situation that 2017 summer when Timofey Mozgov made $72 million and Luol Deng signed with the Lakers for $80 million and Joakim got $90 million from the Knicks. And then the next summer, like, everything was back to normal. So to your point about Zach LaVine's contract, I think this is really important because there will be a steady increase, 10% roughly each year, where the cap gets bigger. And so by the time, 2026, 27 rolls around, when Zach's due for $49 million a year, right now, that would be 31.5% of the cap. Then it could be 25% or even less. And that obviously gives the Bulls a lot more room to work with around the fringes. They'll have a completely different roster at that point anyway, but there's just a lot more additional a lot of additional options that they'll have to bring in other talent when Zach LaVine's not taking up, a third of your cap sheet. So I think that's a big one. And like you said, the RSNs will be coming in, I think, in 2025. That's the Regional Sports Network TV deals, and that will bump up the cap again. So that could be looking even smaller. And obviously, like, with the exception of the COVID year, the money has gone up for the most part every single season. So right now, Zach's contract is 30% of the cap, but that will go down. Like, for example, next year, it's a little bit less than 30. So that will adjust. But I think with this new smoothing and with the new TV deals, that will look even smaller.
Yeah, we're going to get to a point where a Zach equivalent max contract of 30% max, which is what Zach signed. If you're in between years 7 and 9 of your experience in the NBA, that's what you can effectively sign, unless you qualify for the Supermax. You can get access to the 35% a little bit sooner, which obviously Zach didn't. But there's going to be a time in the coming years where the Zach equivalent max deal is going to be like 5 years, 280, 290, maybe even 300, something obscene like that. So we've just got to get used to these numbers just getting completely ridiculous. And maybe the numbers have just grown at such a rate, at a faster rate than our ability to actually process the amount of dollars these guys are getting. But it's not just like that they're receiving more or that they've got more of the pie. Like, the cut that they get is still exactly the same. It's just more money coming into the league, essentially. So,
and I think that's a good thing to hit on there, because everybody was kind of, I don't know if applauding is the right word, but noting the fact that Zach got the first $100 million contract for any Jerry Reinsdorf team this past summer. And like, that is true, but also Reinsdorf is making a whole hell of a lot more money because he's getting a lot more money as the league grows.
Exactly.
So it's all, a percentage of, it's perspective, and it's, how everything else grows with those contracts. So yes, those contracts will look huge. Like, the MLE is going to grow from I think like 7.5% this year. So now you're looking at, what you could have gotten. I think Caruso was an MLE player last year. That was 9.5 million. Next year, it's going to be what, like 12 or 13. So the value of a player you can get goes up, but also that's the same around the league. So that's just sort of like the cost. And the guys you have under contract, those start to look like more steals of contracts because, the rest of the money around the league is going up around them.
Definitely. And another one that's going to impact the Bulls potentially as soon as this offseason, depending when they implement this rule, but restricted free agency, there's been a change there whereby previously teams had 48 hours to match a contract that was given to a restricted free agent, assuming they let a restricted free agent go out and sign a contract with an opposing team. Now you've only got 24 hours. So why is that relevant for the Bulls? Well, Kobe White is a restricted free agent this offseason. So assuming this new rule is implemented this offseason, then instead of 48 hours to match a deal, then the Bulls have 24 hours to potentially match or organize a trade, or you lose the dude for nothing, essentially. So I think that's a good development, because restricted free agency is probably the thing I have the most problem with in terms of the CBA more generally. Like, there's not a lot of control or ability for these guys to maneuver themselves. So I like the fact that they've reduced that, but that is certainly one that will be impacting the Bulls. I don't know if this will necessarily, just because this next one I'm going to speak about, because I don't know when it will be applied, but we know someone like Vooch, for example, is eligible for a contract extension. He can sign a contract extension with the Bulls up until June 30. At the moment, the Bulls can only offer him a deal that's 120% more than what his current deal is. But going forward, veterans who want to sign contract extensions with their current teams, they'll actually be able to sign extensions for 140%. So they basically get a 20% bump in that sense. So I don't know if that's going to necessarily be applicable to Vooch this time around, but it is something for teams more generally to I guess it's another lever for them to retain the guys that they actually want to keep and keep them away from free agency. So I don't know if it's going to impact Vooch and the Bulls at the moment, but I guess using that as an example, maybe in future years it will.
That's a really interesting one. Obviously, that affects guys like Jaylen Brown, DeJounte Murray. It's the same thing that happened with Zach LaVine last year, where he basically opted to let his contract expire with the Bulls because he was able to make more money signing as a free agent than he would have been extending with his team. And I think a lot of what this new CBA aims to do is allow teams to keep their guys. And I think that's a really important thing. Like, you want to be able to build through the draft. And a lot of these rules make the value of draft picks that much more important. So, like you said, I'm not exactly sure when all this stuff will start. I think, they were talking about the midseason tournament could start as early as next year with the minimum of 65 games for voting awards. But stuff like this new second tax apron, which I find to be really interesting, I don't necessarily think that will be next year. And you may say, well, it's a luxury tax, it's the Bulls, it doesn't apply. But actually, I think it could, because, a lot of what I've heard about this is that the penalty for going into the luxury tax won't be as much, meaning you still could get some of that money back from other teams that go into the second luxury tax apron, or the beyond that first luxury tax. You could still be getting back some of that money. You won't be penalized $1.50 for every dollar that you spend over the tax. And that could incentivize teams like the Bulls to go into the tax. Maybe they'll still avoid the second apron, but do a little bit more to try to improve your team around the fringes, because the penalties won't be as severe. So I think that actually could encourage teams like the Bulls or the Wizards, or whoever it is, to go into the tax when in previous seasons they may not have.
So I disagree. Not with your premise more generally, but how it pertains to the Bulls. I don't think there's going to be any situation where they go into the tax. But what this does do is, by introducing, and this is why I put it in the rundown, why I think it's fascinating as it relates to the Bulls. Now that there are two thresholds or two aprons, assuming a team were to cross that second apron, this is the thing. This is how they're going to be impacted. So these teams won't have access to their taxpayer mid-level exception. So a team like the Bucks, for example, can't go out and use that exception on someone like Joe Ingles. There's been other examples as well, like where they can't use that exception. So that's going to be taken away from these high-paying teams. Those teams as well won't be able to trade multiple first round picks that are 7 years down the road. So as an example, like the Suns, they traded all those picks for Kevin Durant. They won't be able to do that going forward, assuming that they're above this second.
You'll be able
threshold.
to trade 6 years out, but not 7. So that limits the amount of picks you can send from 4 to 3.
Yep. And again, these teams won't be able to sign, free agents on the buyout market. Again, a team like the Suns won't be able to go and grab a Terrence Ross, for example. That's another advantage that will be taken away from these teams that are spending so much. They won't also be able to send cash out in trades, and they won't be able to take more money back in trades as well. So essentially, there's been a lot of a lot of attempts to curb the spending, or maybe not the spending, but the amount of availabilities or avenues or instruments these teams to have to continue to add to their team. So why is this relevant to the Bulls? Well, they can pretty much just do as what they're doing right now, which is pretty much nothing. But a lot of these teams that are actually out there trying are going to get penalized, not going to be able to use all these instruments to improve their team, which will potentially bring them back towards that middle class that we spoke about before. So in some ways, the Bulls will be a winner just by doing what they're continuously doing, which is not a lot. But ultimately, the teams that are trying to do a lot are going to get penalized, which will potentially bring them back to the field a little bit. So I did find that quite interesting, actually, if the Bulls could potentially do nothing and make some way in that sense. But
they could, but I think
see.
my point is that I think they will avoid the second apron like the plague, the way that they have avoided the luxury tax to this point. But I don't think the penalty of going into the luxury tax, but staying before, but not spending up to the second apron, those penalties won't be as severe. So they could do that. Not necessarily a guarantee, but I think basically this whole idea is to limit the additional power that a team has just by virtue of the fact that their owners are willing to spend whatever. So, I'm sure you guys have all listened to the Bobby Marks and Woj and Zach Lowe podcast at this point, but teams like the Clippers and the Warriors won't have this just insurmountable competitive advantage because they're willing to spend more. And that could make teams like the Bulls more competitive, relatively speaking.
Yeah, we'll see. But look, there's a whole more that I would want to get into, but I know we're running long here, so maybe let's call it here. But yeah, these changes are fascinating. It's going to be interesting to see how it impacts the team. But coming back to what we said before, like ultimately, whatever CBA changes are made, whatever instruments are available for you and your team to use, like there's going to be new exceptions that are going to be introduced. This team has classically just hasn't used all their exceptions, so despite what changes have been made, we'll see how it actually impacts this team. And ultimately, it depends on what ownership and management want to do, which is seemingly always the case for our beloved Chicago Bulls. But let's call it there. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Whether you are on YouTube, if you are on YouTube, hit the like button on the way out. Friends, if you're listening on Apple, Spotify, whatever it might be, 5-star reviews. Support our friends that support us, Goose Island, Shady Rays, ComEd, all our fun and fine friends that support CHGO, Lawrence and his dingoes, the multiple dingoes who have appeared on the show. We appreciate you. William also got the dingoes around him as well. Thank you for joining me on this episode of the show. You can follow Will and all his writing at Will_Gottlieb. Obviously, jump on the website to read his stuff at allchgo.com. If you want to get... Have you hit 10K yet? We're trying to get Will to 10K on Twitter, so let's do it, friends. If you're not
99 away,
if you're not following the GOAT, what are you doing? Sort it out. Get him to 10K. If you want to follow me too, why the hell would you want to? But in the event that you do, at MK Hoops, you can follow us at CHGO_Bulls. But thank you everyone for tuning in. Thanks again to the Shady Ray Dingoes. But we'll be back at some point next week for a HQ edition, but nonetheless, the guys will be back for post-game tomorrow to take you through Bulls and the Mavericks. But William, thank you. Lawrence, thank you again, everyone. Appreciate you. Speak soon, Bulls fans.